The first sign something was wrong was the HVAC panel chirping like a dying smoke alarm at 6:54 a.m. I stood in the service corridor with my jacket half on, one hand on the breaker box, listening. That sound only happened when two systems were fighting for the same load. Someone upstairs had turned on the executive kitchen equipment early again. I sighed and flipped the switch by muscle memory. Silence returned. Another invisible problem solved before anyone knew it existed. My name is Caleb Rowan. I'd worked in that building for 22 years, long enough that the walls reacted to me before people did. Every weekday started the same way. I unlocked the main door with the original key issued back when the company had 12 employees and a folding table for a reception desk. The lock stuck if you rushed it. I never rushed. The lobby lights flickered awake. The air smelled like lemon cleaner and burnt espresso. Someone had left a bag of takeout in the fridge over the weekend again. Not my job. Never was. Still, I tossed it, wiped the shelf, reset the temperature. If I didn't, it would become a facilities incident by noon. On paper, my title was Operations and Facilities Manager. In practice, I was the buffer between ambition and reality. I knew which pipes knocked before rain, which server rack overheated after 3 hours, which thermostat panicked when humidity crossed 70%. I'd kept that place running through blackouts, floods, budget freezes, and 3 different CEOs who all thought culture decks were infrastructure. They stopped seeing me years ago. I became part of the background, like carpet or drywall. People only noticed me when something broke. Then I was suddenly essential, urgent, everyone's best friend. When things worked, I was invisible. The new HR director, Sloan Mercer, arrived 6 months earlier with a polished smile and a vocabulary full of alignment. She once asked me where the network cable actually went. I pointed to the wall and said, "Into the building." She didn't appreciate that. After that, emails from HR started coming with more people CC'd and fewer pleasantries. That Monday morning, an all-staff email landed just after 9. Subject line, Strategic Workforce Realignment. I'd translated those words for other people before. I knew what followed. Meetings without context, smiles that didn't reach the eyes. I felt it settle in my stomach, heavy and familiar. By late afternoon, a calendar invite appeared on my screen. No agenda, no explanation, just my name, HR, and legal, scheduled for the next morning. I shut down my computer, turned off the lights, and walked out exactly on time. They thought they were about to remove a role. They had no idea how much of the building was still attached to me. By the time I got home that night, the feeling hadn't faded. It sat in my chest while I ate a reheated dinner and watched the local news with the sound low. I'd seen this cycle before. The language always changed, but the intent never did. When companies said realignment, they meant subtraction. I laid my work bag by the door and opened the hall closet where I kept things I might need someday. Old manuals, backup keys, receipts no one else thought mattered. I didn't open anything yet. I just looked, then closed the door and went to bed. Sleep came light and shallow. I woke before my alarm, dressed the same way I always did, and drove downtown in the gray light before sunrise. The building greeted me like it always had. The security panel lagged for half a second before recognizing my code. I made a note in my head to recalibrate it later, a habit that died hard. Conference room C was already occupied when I arrived. Sloan sat at the table, hands folded, expression carefully neutral. Beside her was a man I didn't recognize, mid-40s, tailored suit, leather folder aligned perfectly with the edge of the table. Legal. They always brought legal when the decision was already made. "Caleb," Sloan said, voice warm in the way HR voices are trained to be. "Thanks for coming in. We'll keep this brief." The man slid the folder toward me without looking up. Inside was a severance packet, standard language, 3 months' pay, continuation of benefits until the end of the quarter, a confidentiality clause thick enough to choke on. My title was wrong. They'd dropped facilities entirely, like it had been an afterthought. "We're restructuring," Sloan continued. "The company is moving in a new direction operationally." I nodded. I'd translated this speech for others. New direction meant cheaper, younger, more abstract. The lawyer finally spoke. "We'll need your badge, keys, and any company property in your possession today." I reached into my pocket and placed my badge on the table. Then the keys. All of them. Each labeled in my handwriting from years ago, back when I programmed the door systems myself. Sloan blinked at the pile. "You're sure you've returned everything?" I looked at her and said, "Yes, everything you asked for." She gave the practiced, sympathetic smile. "This isn't personal." I stood. 22 years, and they still thought that sentence helped. I left without raising my voice, without arguing, without asking for reconsideration. Outside, the air felt sharper. I sat in my car for a minute before starting the engine. I didn't feel angry. I felt precise. Somewhere between downtown and the freeway, I stopped thinking like an employee and started thinking like the person who'd signed more papers for that building than anyone else ever had. I didn't drive straight home. I pulled into a quiet strip mall parking lot and sat there with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. Habit told me to call someone, explain, vent. I didn't. Talking too early makes you sloppy. I waited until my breathing slowed, then took out my phone and scrolled past contacts I hadn't used in years until I found the one I needed. His name was Evan Brooks. I'd known him since he was a teenager mowing lawns in my neighborhood. Now he was a commercial real estate attorney who billed by the quarter hour and hated surprises. He answered on the third ring. "Caleb, everything okay?" "Not exactly," I said, "but it's about to be. I need you to look up something old." There was a pause, then the sound of a keyboard. "Give me a name." I gave him the company's legal entity. Another pause, a longer one this time. Evan exhaled slowly. "That lease. You still listed as the primary tenant of record." I closed my eyes. "That's what I thought. They ever submit a renewal?" He clicked again. "Nothing in the system for this year. No notice, no amendment. Silence on their end." I thanked him and hung up before he could ask why. At home, I went straight to the hallway closet and pulled out the box I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a thick folder, edges worn, labeled in black marker, "Lease, Original." I set it on the kitchen table and opened it carefully. The paper smelled like dust and ink. I remembered signing it back when the company couldn't get a landlord to return a call. No credit, no revenue, just an idea and a promise. I'd signed because someone had to. Page by page, I read like the past might argue back. Renewal clause, notice period, dates. My finger stopped halfway down the page. The deadline had passed by 2 days. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. They'd let me go without checking who actually held the building, without asking who had authority over the space they were sitting in. Utilities, insurance, maintenance contracts. I started making a list. Everything still ran through accounts tied to me. I could warn them. I could send an email and be helpful one last time. That was the old reflex. I folded the lease closed instead. For the first time since I started there, I didn't fix the problem. I let it exist. The next morning, I woke without an alarm and felt something unfamiliar settle in. Quiet. No mental checklist. No phantom alerts buzzing behind my eyes. I made coffee slowly and sat at the kitchen table with the lease folder open in front of me. This wasn't anger. It was arithmetic. Clause by clause. Obligation by obligation. The company had missed the renewal window. That didn't mean chaos yet. It meant leverage. Under the terms, the lease converted to month unless the tenant of record intervened. That tenant was still me. I called Evan back just after 9. "I need to confirm procedure," I said. "No hypotheticals. If a tenant fails to renew and continues occupying the space, what's my cleanest exit?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had shifted into professional mode. 30-day termination notice, certified delivery. If they've sublet or altered use without disclosure, it accelerates. I thought about the temporary consultants crammed into a back office I'd never approved. Crypto, maybe. Evan continued, "You don't owe them a warning beyond what's required in the lease. Silence counts as notice if they ignore delivery." I thanked him again. I spent the rest of the day doing nothing that looked like revenge. I updated my resume. I fixed a loose cabinet hinge. I paid bills. Around 4, an email arrived from HR. Subject: confirmation of returned assets. Polite. Vague. They wanted reassurance I no longer possessed anything of value. I didn't reply yet. Instead, I opened a blank document and drafted a formal termination notice addressed to the property manager. Clear language, no emotion. Effective date, 30 days from receipt. I printed it on heavy paper and signed my name carefully, the same way I had 2 decades earlier. The next morning, I walked into the property management office downtown wearing a jacket I usually saved for funerals and weddings. The manager, Richard Hale, recognized me immediately. "Caleb," he said, surprised. I handed him the folder and asked him to confirm something for the record. He skimmed, frowned, then leaned back in his chair. "They didn't renew," he said. "We assumed they were sorting it out internally." I nodded. They weren't. I slid the termination notice across the desk. Richard read it twice. "This will cause problems," he said. I stood. They caused them first. Back home, I filed the notice electronically with the county and paid extra to expedite processing. The confirmation email chimed softly. That sound meant more than any farewell speech ever could. I finally replied to HR. "Yes," I wrote, "all company property has been returned, including the parts you forgot were mine." The silence after that email was immediate and complete. No follow-up, no clarification, just a clean break, the kind companies think ends things. I spent the next 2 days doing what I hadn't allowed myself to do in years, nothing urgent. Evan called to confirm the filing had been accepted and that the clock was officially running. 30 days on paper, less in practice once notices were posted. I asked him one more question, the kind you only ask when you're already committed. What happens if they don't respond? He didn't hesitate. Then it moves without them. That was the part people never understood. Systems don't require permission to function. They just follow rules. On the 3rd morning, I drove past the building without stopping. From the street, everything looked the same. Lights on, people moving, the illusion of permanence intact. Inside, though, the gears were already turning. The property manager sent certified letters and emailed scanned copies to every address on file. Legal, finance, HR. Nobody acknowledged receipt. They were busy reassigning desks, rewriting org charts, pretending the ground beneath them wasn't time-limited. That afternoon, Evan forwarded me a copy of a supplemental note from Richard. It included a detail I'd half expected: unauthorized subleasing. A portion of the floor had been rented out informally to a third-party consultant. No amendment, no disclosure. Material breach. That accelerated everything. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt confirmed. Late that evening, my phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, one of the remaining facilities techs. "Something's off," he wrote. "Security's asking questions. Property management called about access logs. You know anything?" I stared at the screen longer than necessary. Marcus was good at his job. Quiet, careful. He'd helped me keep the place together more than once. I typed back, "I'm fine, and so are you, as long as you keep doing your job." He didn't reply. 2 days later, the notice was posted. Fluorescent paper, taped and sealed to the glass near the main entrance. Termination of tenancy. Demand to vacate. 48 hours to acknowledge before enforcement escalated. It took less than an hour for the building to change temperature. Panic doesn't announce itself loudly at first. It leaks. Conversations stop mid-sentence. People refresh inboxes too often. Meetings get rescheduled without explanation. By mid-morning, someone finally read the plaintive line, "My name," correctly spelled. I imagined the moment it landed, the quiet recalculation. By evening, my phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen since the holidays, the CEO. I let it ring until it stopped. Then I poured a glass of water, sat down, and waited. Some things are better answered when the other side understands they're not in control of the timing anymore. The call came back 20 minutes later. Same number. I answered this time. "Caleb, what is happening?" His voice was tight, clipped, the sound of someone trying to sound authoritative while standing on thin ice. I didn't raise mine. I didn't need to. "You terminated my role without reviewing the lease," I said. The silence that followed was sharp. "We assumed," he started. I stopped him. "That's the word that got you here. You assumed the building belonged to the company. It doesn't. You assumed someone else handled renewals. They didn't. You assumed I was replaceable. That one's on you." He tried to pivot. "Legal is looking into this. There must be a mistake." "There isn't," I said. "The notice was sent. It was received, ignored. The timeline is in motion." His breathing changed. "Investors are already asking questions. This could cripple operations." I thought of the countless times I'd stayed late rerouting power so demo days wouldn't fail, the weekends I'd answered calls so leadership wouldn't look unprepared. "You should have asked those questions before yesterday morning," I said. He lowered his voice. "What do you want?" I looked around my kitchen. Clean counters, no alarms, nothing buzzing. "I want exactly what the lease allows," I said. "Nothing more, nothing less." The line went dead. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. The next day, Evan confirmed the enforcement schedule. County marshal, inventory window, no appeal filed, no response from the company's counsel. Too much confusion, not enough coordination. By afternoon, photos started circulating online, the notice taped to the glass. Employees clustered near the entrance, phones out. Someone captioned it with a joke about corporate karma. It wasn't funny to the people inside. That evening, Marcus texted again. They're scrambling. HR's blaming facilities, facilities is blaming legal, legal's not answering anyone. I typed back, "Keep your head down. This isn't about you." I meant it. The fallout always hits the wrong people first. I slept well that night. The next morning, the building emptied faster than usual. Meetings canceled, remote work encouraged, damage control disguised as flexibility. By noon, the marshal's office confirmed posting for the following day. 48 hours to vacate meant 48 hours to panic. I spent that afternoon signing one more document Evan had prepared, a clean lease transfer to a new tenant already approved by property management. Higher rent, longer term. They read every clause. When I put the pen down, I didn't smile. I just closed the folder and set it aside. Whatever happened next wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about consequences catching up to assumptions. The notice went up the next morning at 8:06 a.m., bright orange, impossible to ignore, zip-tied to the glass doors like a warning label no one wanted to read. The county seal sat at the top, official, final. By 8:12, the lobby filled with the low murmur of disbelief. People stopped pretending they were early. Phones came out. Someone laughed, then stopped when no one joined in. Inside, HR pulled an emergency meeting in the glass conference room, the one meant to signal transparency while hiding nothing at all. The blinds didn't fully close. Half the floor watched as voices rose and hands gestured sharply. By 9, the CEO arrived, jacket half on, coffee untouched. He read the notice twice, then a third time slower, like the words might rearrange themselves if he concentrated hard enough. They didn't. Calls went out, to legal, to the board, to property management. Each one ended the same way. Calm explanations, no flexibility. The lease had expired. The tenant of record had exercised his rights. Silence had been interpreted as consent. By 10, the building felt hollow. People packed laptops without being told to. Someone wheeled a whiteboard toward the elevators and abandoned it halfway. At noon, facilities received instructions to begin preparing for exit, not from leadership, from reality. I drove downtown once that afternoon and parked across the street. I didn't get out. I watched. The building looked unchanged from the outside, all glass and confidence, but inside it was unraveling. A company built on momentum had no plan for stillness. At 2:47, my phone rang again. The CEO. I didn't answer, not because I was angry, because there was nothing left to clarify. By 4, news of the eviction hit a local business blog. No names at first, just phrases like operational oversight and leadership misstep. Comments filled in the blanks faster than reporters could. By evening, the lobby lights were off. The sign on the door remained. I drove home with the radio low, windows cracked, the city moving on around me. I didn't feel victorious. I felt lighter, like I'd set something heavy down after carrying it too long. Tomorrow, they would start moving boxes. The day after, the keys would stop working. The system would do what systems do when no one stands in the way. By the following afternoon, the parking garage echoed differently. Fewer engines, more hollow space. Inside the building, cardboard boxes appeared like a rash. Someone had taped printer paper to a rolling cart that read "Temp Relocation," as if naming it made it reversible. It didn't. The CEO finally reached me just after 7. I was at home, reorganizing a shelf that hadn't been touched in years. I answered without greening. "You've made your point," he said. His voice was hoarse, stripped of polish. "We're willing to negotiate." I leaned against the counter and listened. New role, consulting arrangement. Compensation he wouldn't have approved a week earlier, all designed to rewind time. "You're negotiating with the wrong moment," I said. "The lease is executed. The space is reassigned. This isn't leverage anymore. It's aftermath." He tried one last angle. "You could have warned us." I thought about the meeting room, the folder, the wrong title on the severance letter. I replied evenly, "You fired the person who knew what to warn you about." That ended it. He didn't argue. He disconnected. The next morning, the move-out began in earnest. Chairs stacked, plants abandoned. Someone argued with a marshal about access times. It went nowhere. I stayed home. I didn't need to witness it to know how it unfolded. By noon, a video surfaced online. The CEO in the loading bay, suit rumpled, losing his temper over a folding chair that didn't deserve it. The internet did what it does. Commentary, memes, judgment. None of it involved me by name, and that was fine. Evan texted to confirm final possession transfer was scheduled for Monday. New tenant keys cut, access codes changed. I replied with a simple thumbs up. That evening, a courier arrived with a small package. Inside was a handwritten note from the incoming tenant thanking me for a smooth transition. They'd read the lease carefully, he said. They always do when they're paying attention. I placed the note on the table and poured myself a drink. Outside, the city hummed. Somewhere downtown, an empty office waited for a different kind of company. I didn't feel smug. I felt complete. What they lost wasn't space. It was the assumption that someone else would always clean up after them. Monday morning arrived without ceremony. I woke early out of habit, then realized there was nowhere I needed to be. The radio played softly while I made breakfast. Around 9, Evan confirmed the handover had begun. New tenant staff on site. Locks changed. Access badges deactivated. Everything by the book. Downtown, the former company's name was already coming off the directory. Someone had taped over it with printer paper while they waited for a replacement plate. Temporary solutions for permanent mistakes. By late morning, photos circulated of employees carrying personal items in mismatched boxes. No speeches, no exit interviews, just logistics. The new tenant moved with purpose, measurements taken, contractors on schedule. They treated the space like something that required respect. Around noon, I drove past again, slower this time. A banner was being unrolled behind the glass, the old logo still faintly visible beneath adhesive residue. Layers. That's how places remember. My phone buzzed once more. The CEO's name flashed, then disappeared. No voicemail this time. I didn't call back. There was nothing left to exchange. That afternoon, an article ran with more detail. Missed renewal, operational oversight, leadership turnover. The comments were less cruel now, more instructive. People recognize patterns when they repeat. At home, I opened the drawer where I'd kept one thing back, the original building key. Heavy, worn smooth by years of use. I turned it in my hand, then hung it on a hook by the door. It didn't unlock anything anymore. It didn't need to. It was proof that for a long time I had been trusted with more than they realized. The sun dipped low. I poured a glass of water and sat by the window. 22 years of muscle memory began to fade. The building would go on. So would they, somewhere else, diminished but intact. I wasn't interested in watching the rest. Closure doesn't require applause. Sometimes it's just the quiet moment when you stop waiting for recognition and realize you already held the leverage all along. The new tenant finished moving in by the end of the week. Their logo replaced the old one cleanly, no residue left behind. Inside, the space changed quickly. Different furniture, different rhythm. People who checked doors before opening them and read documents before signing them. Evans sent a final message confirming everything had closed without challenge, no appeals, no follow-up. The company had secured temporary offices across town, a downgrade they framed internally as flexibility. The board reshuffled leadership. Publicly, it was positioned as a growth reset. Privately, it was damage control. I heard fragments through people who still texted me out of habit. Systems don't forget immediately. They take time to unwind. One afternoon, a former employee stopped me on the street. He thanked me quietly, said the exit forced him to leave a place that had stopped making sense. I nodded and wished him well. That was enough. At home, life settled into something simpler. No emergency calls, no alerts, no assumption that I'd fix what no one wanted to understand. I took the key off the hook once more, then put it back. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. Loyalty without boundaries becomes liability. Competence without recognition becomes leverage. They hadn't lost a building because of malice or revenge. They lost it because they forgot to respect the person who kept it standing. I didn't burn anything down. I didn't raise my voice. I followed the rules as written and stepped aside while they discovered what silence really costs. When people ask why it happened, they talk about missed emails, legal technicalities, bad timing. They never mention the man who unlocked the door every morning and made sure the lights came on. That's fine. Some work is only visible when it's gone.